Green Philosophy. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite quotes from Dmitry Orlov's Emergency Eyewash Essays. Ever-increasing wealth inequality is as American as eating out of a bag, neck tattoos, gaudy diamond engagement rings, and knee-length swimming trousers. All of the Western media is now as good as Pravda was back in the Soviet Union. Good for wiping your ass with. That is. It's a sad day for anyone who cares about the truth, but can only understand English. Getting back to basics, it is a fairly obvious and increasingly well-recognized fact that the American empire, the empire of military bases, the Federal Reserve, the IMF, and the World Bank is on its way out. And that is from The Twilight of the Oligarchs. The United States is an international embarrassment, military defeat, humanitarian catastrophe. All these things just bounce off of them and stick to you for bringing them up and being overly negative about their rose-colored view of themselves. The only hit the elites can actually feel is a hit to their pocketbook. Shahid Bolson has said that Americans lack the creativity or imagination for revolution. Some people thought that the populace, consisting as it does of zombified, overfed clowns, addicted to Facebook and erotic internet content, is unlikely to stage the revolution. That is from Twilight of the Oligarchs. Perhaps it is time to rename 350.org to something closer to reality. This organization has obviously lost its fight to limit atmospheric CO2 concentrations to 350 parts per million. Just some of the usual useless politicking. Happy talk about climate change. Against this backdrop of unmistakable failure of environmentalism, there are actual reductions in carbon dioxide emissions taking place in the United States. Certainly too small to save us, but real nevertheless. The reason they are taking place is that the U.S. economy is becoming increasingly hollowed out. In the process of you getting that permit, degree, qualification, or certificate will end with somebody else telling you what your goal ought to be. That's from Minimum Viable Sociopathy. The goal is, universally, to accumulate things. Dollars or stripes on your uniform, or publications and citations or earwax. Details don't matter, but what matters is that these things have never had much of anything to do with your original goal. That's from Minimum Viable Sociopathy. Getting involved in something that might require registration, certification, or licensing, then I need to backtrack or head in a different direction for a bit until everybody loses interest. In doing so, I sometimes forego some opportunities for an increased income, but that is the price of freedom. Freedom is indeed slavery. To enjoy their quote-unquote freedom, Americans spend most of their lives working off debt, be it a mortgage, medical debt incurred due to an illness, or student loans. That's from Defeat is Victory. Americans also work longer hours with less time off and worse benefits than any other developed country, and their wages haven't increased in 2 generations. That's from Defeat is Victory. The American empire is an empire of chaos. Yes, it sort of fails to achieve peace, prosperity, democracy, stability, avert humanitarian crises, or stop lots of horrible crimes. That is from Defeat is Victory. But throughout this process, their common playbook has remained the same. Pseudo-liberal, pseudo-capitalism for the insiders, and military domination and economic exploitation for everyone else. That's from the Imperial Collapse Playbook. The United States is an evil empire, attempting not so much to rule the world as disrupt it to its short-term advantage. That's from Grounds for Optimism. The United States is failing as an empire, as a country, and no amount of fraud, mayhem, torture, and murder is going to save it. And that is from Grounds for Optimism. The United States is quite powerful and can cause massive damage on its way down. This damage must be contained while plans are drawn up for an international arrangement that will rise upon its demise. That's from Grounds for Optimism. Another major shift I have observed is that a significant percentage of the thinking people in the United States no longer trust their national media. That's from Grounds for Optimism. Economic inequality has to increase continuously in the United States until the whole thing crashes, because the only way to continue propping the financial bubble while the real, physical, productive economy is actually shrinking. That's from Grounds for Optimism. Worldwide chaos must be driven up because that's the only way the US military can justify its existence. That's from Grounds for Optimism. Anything good to report on healthcare reform? No. It's more ridiculously bloated and expensive than ever. That's from Grounds for Optimism. How about an effort to reduce carbon emissions to postpone, no longer to avoid, the eastern seaboard where half of everything is going underwater? No, not a glimmer of hope. Problems with runaway public debt or unfunded government liabilities solved? No, there have been no efforts in that direction at all. That's from Grounds for Optimism. If Greece decides to opt out of the European Union in order to get around Russia's retaliatory sanctions against the EU, then it will become entirely unclear who has actually sanctioned whom. That's from Whiplash. No escape. Civilized persons are very much defined by the things they own, the brands they favor, and the physical setting they demand. Civilized existence demands a house with a pile of electronic toys and an even bigger pile of stuff they never actually use but simply have. Were there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? No. And the vial of white powder, which Colin Powell menacingly held up at the United Nations, was fake. That's from Masters of Parallel Universes. The Iraqi mobile biological weapons factories did not exist. Was Al-Qaeda active in Iraq prior to the USA invasion? No, we know that it wasn't. That's from Masters of Parallel Universes. The United States is best characterized as a decomposing corpse of a nation, lorded over by a tiny clique of oligarchs who control the herd by wielding Orwellian methods of mind control. That's from Extinct, Extinctor, Extinctist. In the United States, you can't call them anything because they aren't listening, for they are too busy fiddling with their electronic life support units to which they have become addicted. Thanks to Facebook and the like, they are now so far inside Plato's cave that even the shadows they see aren't real. The signs of the advanced state of decomposition are unmistakable everywhere you look, be it education, medicine, culture, or the general state of American society, where now fully half of the working age men is impaired in their ability to earn a decent living. That's from Extinct, Extinctor, Extinctist. The climate of Earth, our home planet, is, to put it as politely as possible, completely effed. That's from Extinct, Extinctor, Extinctist. The current oversized human population is a product of fossil fuel burning, and once that's over, human population will crash. This is called the die-off, and it's something that happens all the time. A population, say of yeast in a vat of sugary liquid, consumes its food and then dies off. The United States is one of the biggest offenders when it comes to carbon emissions, but the rotting corpse of America's political system is incapable of any constructive action. It is too busy destroying countries. That's from Extinct, Extinctor, Extinctist. Indeed, the million or so of Ukrainians that are now in Russia, or the million or so Syrians who are no longer in Syria, are the smart ones. The Ukrainians who are volunteering to fight are the idiots. The ones who are fleeing to Russia to sit out the war are the smart ones. That's from extinct, extinctor, extinctus. While the fossil fuel economy continues to operate, cities remain survivable because of the availability of air conditioning. Once it shuts down, urban heat wave extinction episodes will become widespread. That's from extinct, extinctor, extinctus. But the entire northern half of Eurasia looks quite nice for the foreseeable future. So if you don't want to go extinct, you better start teaching your kids Russian. That's from extinct, extinctor, extinctus. You see, bigger populations translate to bigger population centers, and research results show that the bigger the city, the higher its energy use per capita. That's from Financial Feudalism. Observe, in big cities, people talk faster, walk faster, and generally have to live more intensely and operate on a tighter schedule just to stay alive. That's from Financial Feudalism. Climate destabilization is producing ever more violent storms, ever more severe droughts. California now has just a year's worth of water left and is predicted to wipe out entire countries because of rising ocean levels, failing monsoon seasons, and dwindling irrigation water from glacial melt. Pollution has likewise reached its limits in many areas. Urban smog, be it in Paris, Beijing, Moscow, or Tehran, has become so bad that industrial activities are being curtailed simply so that people can breathe. And that's from Financial Feudalism. Whereas before, money was borrowed in order to produce growth, now it had to be borrowed in ever larger amounts simply to prevent financial and industrial collapse. And that's from Financial Feudalism. Access to free money is a privilege, and those who are privileged are the bankers and the industrialists they fund. That's from Financial Feudalism. What is left is a highly stratified society with privileges dispensed based on hereditary wealth. Those at the top get paid to borrow and get to surf on a wave of free money, while those at the bottom are driven ever further into debt, servitude, and destitution. That's from Financial Feudalism. George Orwell once offered an excellent explanation for this phenomenon. As the imperial endgame approaches, it becomes a matter of imperial self-preservation to breed a special purpose ruling class, one that is incapable of understanding that the endgame is approaching. And that's from License to Kill. As empires collapse, they turn inward and subject their own populations to the same ill treatment to which they subjected others. That's from License to Kill. The number of Americans being murdered by their own police with minimal repercussions for those doing the killing is quite stunning. When Americans wonder who the enemy really is, they need look no further. That's from License to Kill. The precedent has already been set for deploying U.S. troops on American soil. As law and order break down in more and more places, we will see more and more U.S. troops on the streets of cities in the U.S. spreading death and destruction just like they did in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And that's from License to Kill. Living in apartments scattered throughout a large city is not going to last very long. If that's how you have to start, then use the time you have to save money and buy land. That's from Communities That Abide. You probably should avoid sending your children through public education, treating it as a mental poison. It has very little to do with educating and everything to do with institutionalization. And that's from Communities That Abide. Also be sure to avoid military service. If drafted, you should probably refuse to carry weapons or use lethal force of any sort. That's from Communities That Abide. Material gratification, luxury, and lavish lifestyles are not good for your community. Children will become spoiled. Adults will develop expensive tastes and bad habits. That's from Communities That Abide. Your community should provide a basic level of material comfort and an absolutely outstanding level of emotional and spiritual comfort. That's from communities that abide. Always keep in mind what made you form the community to start with. The fact that the surrounding society doesn't work, can't give you what you need, and to put it in the plainest terms possible, isn't any good. And that's from communities that abide. Yes, there will be a few hard cases who will insist on getting right in the face of Washington officialdom in futile hopes of somehow affecting the political process of winning over a few of their compatriots. That's from The Limits of Propaganda. That is because if you live in the United States, actually know how the political system there operates, and still think that the United States is a democracy, then you do have a mental problem. That's from The Limits of Propaganda. Iraq has been dismembered. Libya is a no-go zone. Syria is a humanitarian disaster. Egypt is a military dictatorship executing a program of mass imprisonment. That's from America's Achilles heel. The next candidate for extreme makeover into a bombed-out wasteland might be the United States itself. That's from America's Achilles heel. As the events in Ferguson and more recently in Baltimore have indicated, the tensions between African Americans and the police have escalated to a point where explosions become likely. That's from America's Achilles heel. And Shahid Bolson has made similar comments. But if the civil unrest is within the United States itself, then the various media outlets find themselves competing against each other in who can sensationalize it better in order to get more viewership and more advertising revenue. That's from America's Achilles heel. Thus, there is the potential for a positive feedback loop. More civil unrest in America generates more sensationalized news coverage, which in turn amplifies the civil unrest, which further sensationalizes the news coverage. That's from America's Achilles heel. The swift introduction of the military might seem a bit odd, considering that most police departments, even small town ones, have been heavily militarized in recent years. And even the security people at some school districts now have military vehicles and machine guns. That's from America's Achilles heel. There's an awful lot of weapons of all sorts in the United States already, and more will come in all the time as the United States is forced to close overseas military bases due to a lack of funds. That's from America's Achilles heel. But bad things happen to militaries when they are ordered to shoot at their own people. Such orders result in fragging, shooting your own officers, in refusal to follow orders, and in attempts to stand up for the other side. That's from America's Achilles heel. Having a third of young American blacks locked up gives them all the opportunity they need to organize an effective insurgency. That's from America's Achilles heel. The USSR led the world in basic scientific research, probing into matters that did not have any commercial applications, simply because they were scientifically interesting and led to publishable results. No, you can't go back to the USSR. Basic science is the premier transnational intellectual endeavor of the human species in modern times, and the damage done to the Soviet science has caused significant damage to the pursuit of scientific knowledge throughout the world, and a diminution in the stature of the scientific endeavor. The ability for Russians to live rent-free provides them with a very large competitive advantage compared to families in the high-rent, debt-ridden countries such as the United States. That's from No, You Can't Move Back to the USSR. The US fought a revolution to keep slavery legal. It was about to be abolished by the British. Then it fought a civil war to change slavery from one form to another. There are more African Americans in US jails now than there were slaves in the Confederate South prior to the Civil War. The NSA is indeed spying on all of them, but they consider this to be perfectly normal, and continue to walk into voting booths and, like well-trained lab animals, repeatedly pull the lever for the same people who had instituted this insane, purposeless, yet very expensive surveillance regime. Social media is a poor substitute for normal, healthy human contact and a symptom of a generalized social sickness. People are alienated and technology funnels them into these venues in search of something, anything at all, resembling human interaction, so that they can continue to feel that they exist. If you ignore the laughable way the US government computes the unemployment rate, it turns out the real unemployment rate has grown from 10% at the beginning of the century to around 23% today. That's from Pop Goes the Bubble. Ever-increasing wealth inequality as American is eating out of a bag, neck tattoos, gaudy diamond engagement rings, and knee-length swimming trousers. That's from Pop Goes the Bubble. There are lots of worthwhile ways to spend money in the United States. Build public transportation, for instance, but the problem is none of them make money. Pop goes the bubble. Sergei Glazyev said that anyone who knows mathematics could see that the United States is on the verge of collapse because its debt has gone exponential. That's from The Care and Feeding of a Financial Black Hole. Do you like the fact that you have internet access, that the lights are on, and that there is water on tap? Well, if you like these things, you must also like the financial black hole, because that's what's making all of these things possible in spite of your country being bankrupt. With the help of the fraudulent mortgage racket, it sucks in houses and spits them out. Again, unencumbered with bad debt. With the help of the medical industry, it sucks in sick people and spits them out again, bankrupt. That's from The Care and Feeding of a Financial Black Hole. With the help of the higher education racket, the United States sucks in hopeful young people and spits them out as graduates with worthless degrees and saddled with mountainous student debt. That's from The Care and Feeding of a Financial Black Hole. With the help of the military-industrial complex, the United States sucks in just about anything and spits out corpses, invalids, environmental damage, and global instability. That's from The Feeding of a Financial Black Hole. To be able to make the payments, the country is forced to dismantle its society and economy through the imposition of austerity, to privatize everything in sight, turning it into collateral for more loans, and to surrender its sovereignty. That's from Feeding the Financial Black Hole.